Empty chambers, barred windows, the great endless sweep of the night above the battlements. That is all I found above ground, but on the lower floor of the tower, just outside the door to the dungeon stairs, there was a resin torch in the sconce, and a tinderbox in the niche beside it, tracks in the dust, the lock well oiled and easy to turn when I finally found the right key for it. I shone the torch before me on a narrow screw stairway and started down, a little repelled by a stench that rose from somewhere quite far below me. Of course, I knew that stench. It was common enough in every cemetery in Paris. In Les Innocents it was thick as noxious gas, and you had to live with it to shop the stalls there, deal with the letter writers. It was the stench of decomposing bodies, and though it sickened me, made me back up a few steps, it wasn't all that strong, and the odor of the burning resin helped to subdue it. I went on down. If there were dead mortals here, well, I couldn't run away from them, but on the first level beneath the ground, I found no corpses. Only a vast, cool burial chamber with its rusted iron doors, open to the stairs, and 3 giant stone sarcophagi in the center of it. It was very like Magnus's cell above, only much larger. It had the same low curved ceiling, the same crude and gaping fireplace. And what could that mean except that other vampires had once slept here? No one puts fireplaces in burial vaults, at least not that I had ever known. And there were even stone benches here, and the sarcophagi were like the one above with great figures carved on them. But years of dust overlay everything, and there were so many spider webs. Surely no vampires dwelled here now. Quite impossible, yet it was very strange. Where were those who had lain in these coffins? Had they burnt themselves up like Magnus, or were they still existing somewhere? I went in and opened the sarcophagi one by one, nothing but dust inside. No evidence of other vampires at all, no indication that any other vampires existed. I went out and continued down the stairway, even though the smell of the decay grew stronger and stronger. In fact, it very quickly became unbearable. It was coming from behind a door that I could see below, and I had real difficulty in making myself approach it. Of course, as a mortal man, I'd loathe this smell, but that was nothing to the aversion I felt now. My new body wanted to run from it. I stopped, took a deep breath, and forced myself towards the door, determined to see what the fiend had done here. Well, the stench was nothing to the sight of it. In a deep prison cell lay a heap of corpses in all states of decay, the bones and rotted flesh crawling with worms and insects. Rats ran from the light of the torch, brushing past my legs as they made for the stairs, and my nausea became a knot in my throat. The stench suffocated me. But I couldn't stop staring at these bodies. There was something important here, something terribly important, to be realized. And it came to me suddenly that all these dead victims had been men. Their boots and ragged clothing gave evidence of that, and every single one of them had yellow hair, very much like my own hair. The few who had features left appeared to be young men, tall, slight of build. And the most recent occupant here, the wet and reeking corpse that lay with its arms outstretched through the bars, so resembled me that he might have been a brother. In a daze, I moved forward until the tip of my boot touched his head. I lowered the torch, my mouth opening as if to scream. The wet, sticky eyes that swarmed with gnats were blue eyes. I stumbled backwards. A wild fear gripped me that the thing would move, grab hold of my ankle. And I knew why it would. As I drew up against the wall, I tripped on a plate of rotted food and a pitcher. The pitcher went over and broke, and out of it the curdled milk spilled like vomit. Pain circled my ribs, blood came up like liquid fire into my mouth, and it shot out of my lips, splashing on the floor in front of me. I had to reach for the open door to steady myself, but through the haze of nausea I stared at the blood. I stared at the gorgeous crimson color of it in the light of the torch. I watched the blood darken as it sank into the mortar between the stones. The blood was alive, and the sweet smell of it cut like a blade through the stench of the dead. Spasms of thirst drove away the nausea. My back was arching. I was bending lower and lower to the blood with astonishing elasticity, and all the while my thoughts raced. This young man had been alive in this cell. This rotted food and milk were here either to nourish or torment him. He had died in the cell, trapped with those corpses, knowing full well he would soon be one of them. God, to suffer that! To suffer that! And how many others had known exactly the same fate, young men with yellow hair, all of them? I was down on my knees and bending over. I held the torch low with my left hand, and my head went all the way down to the blood, my tongue flashing out of my mouth so that I saw it like the tongue of a lizard. It scraped at the blood on the floor, shivers of ecstasy. Oh, too lovely! Was I doing this? Was I lapping up this blood, not 2 inches from this dead body? Was my heart heaving with every taste, not 2 inches from this dead boy, whom Magnus had brought here as he brought me, this boy that Magnus had then condemned to death instead of immortality? The filthy cell flickered on and off like a flame as I licked up the blood. The dead man's hair touched my forehead. His eye, like a fractured crystal, stared at me. Why wasn't I locked in this cell? What test had I passed that I was not screaming now as I shook the bars, the horror that I had foreseen in the village inn slowly closing in on me? The blood tremors passed through my arms and legs, and the sound I heard, the gorgeous sound as enthralling as the crimson of the blood, the blue of the boy's eyes, the glistening wings of the gnat, the sliding opaline body of the worm, the blaze of the torch, was my own raw and guttural screaming. I dropped the torch and struggled backwards on my knees, crashing against the tin plate and the broken pitcher. I climbed to my feet and ran up the stairway, and as I slammed shut the dungeon door, my screams rose up and up to the very top of the tower. I was lost in the sound as it bounced off the stones and came back to me. I couldn't stop, couldn't close my mouth or cover it, but through the barred entranceway and through a dozen narrow windows above I saw the unmistakable light of morning coming. My screams died. The stones had begun to glow. The light seeped around me like scalding steam, burning my eyelids. I made no decision to run. I was simply doing it, running up and up to the inner chamber. As I came out of the passage, the room was full of a dim purple fire. The jewels overflowing the chest appeared to be moving. I was almost blind as I lifted the lid of the sarcophagus. Quickly it fell into place above me. The pain in my face and hands died away, and I was still. And I was safe, and fear and sorrow melted into a cool and fathomless darkness.